In this talk, we will learn about the classification of protists, which are some of the earliest eukaryotic organisms. Eukaryotes are thought to have evolved after prokaryotes. According to the fossil record, we are able to detect single-celled eukaryotes around 2 billion years ago. Now, U stands for true and karyon means nucleus or kernel. Now, nucleus itself means a tiny kernel or a nut. The reason the nucleus was named this way because when we look at a cell and observe the nucleus, it does indeed look like a tiny nut or kernel that is present in the cell. The nucleus is the compartment of the cell where the DNA is present. In the case of all eukaryotes, we do observe the presence of the nucleus, which is the home of its genetic information, or DNA. All eukaryotes are grouped in the domain of eukarya. There is immense diversity among eukaryotes. Some are unicellular, while others are multicellular. There are 4 traditional kingdoms in the domain of eukarya. The first one is Protista. The organisms that belong to this kingdom that has now been abandoned are protists. The reason it has been abandoned is because the members are genetically very variable from one another, and hence this kingdom is not a monophyletic group. Fungi is another kingdom of eukarya, followed by Plantae, which includes organisms that are photoautotrophs. Animalia is the last or 4th traditional kingdom that is observed in the domain of eukarya. Any eukaryotic organism that does not show features of a fungus, a plant, or an animal is considered as a protist. This vague definition of a protist results in a very diverse kingdom, which was the kingdom of Protista. Due to this diversity, the kingdom of Protista is not a monophyletic kingdom. When we look at the phylogenetic tree, we are able to see that plants, fungi, and animals arose from ancestors that belong to the kingdom of Protista. However, plants, fungi, and animals were not considered to be part of the kingdom of Protista. This also shows that hence the kingdom of Protista is not a monophyletic kingdom. Thus, the kingdom of Protista no longer exists and is not used by taxonomists and systematists. Currently, protists are being classified based on their genetic characteristics. This has resulted in organizing protists into supergroups. The hope is to form monophyletic clades that will show the evolutionary relationships among different protists. Since there is a continuous generation of genetic information, these supergroups and other groups that come within it are revised periodically. For example, this is the phylogenetic tree that was proposed in the early 2000s. In 2020, the tree was revised, and this is what was proposed. In this talk, we are going to learn about some of these supergroups, which includes the Excavates, the SAR supergroup, the Archaeplastida group, as well as the Amorphia group. Protists that belong to the group of Excavata are called Excavates. These include the diplomonads, Parabasalids, and Euglenozoan groups. Excavata got its name because some of the members have a groove that is present on one side of the cell body. Protists that belong to the group of diplomonads and Parabasalids have some common features. They show the presence of reduced mitochondria, and many of them are parasites. They all tend to be heterotrophs and have flagella that allow them to move. In many instances, they live in anaerobic environments, and there are many examples of organisms that belong to these groups that are known to cause diseases in humans. The group of Euglenozoa is a very diverse group, and they are considered to be among the earliest of eukaryotes that possess mitochondria. There are some organisms in this group that are autotrophs, like Euglena, while there are others that are heterotrophs, like trypanosomes. SAR is a supergroup that got its name from other groups that are present in it. These include the Stramenopiles, Alveolates, and Rhizaria. The SAR supergroup is an extremely diverse monophyletic group. One of the members of the SAR supergroup is Stramenopiles. Stramen means straw, while pilos means hair. Stramenopiles got its name because some of its members show the presence of a flagellum that has hair-like structures on it. Stramenopiles is a diverse group, with some members being unicellular, like diatoms, which show many different shapes and sizes, while others are multicellular, like brown algae. Now, these diatoms and brown algae are photoautotrophs, but there are other members in Stramenopiles that are heterotrophs, like the Oomycetes. Let us look at some of the features of brown algae. These are autotrophic seaweeds that obtain their plastids through the process of secondary endosymbiosis. To understand this phenomenon, let us go back in time and look at an early eukaryotic cell that already had mitochondria. It engulfed a free-living cyanobacterium, which was autotrophic. This eukaryotic cell, with time, evolved to form a red or a green alga. We are looking at a red alga in this example. And that cyanobacteria that it engulfed, well, it became a chloroplast and is no longer free-living. This allowed the red alga to become a photoautotroph itself, and this process is primary endosymbiosis. Now, another eukaryotic cell engulfed this algal cell, and when that happened, it evolved in time to form a brown alga. The nucleus of that red alga was lost, however, the chloroplast remained. This is an example of secondary endosymbiosis, where one eukaryotic cell engulfed another eukaryotic cell and was able to retain the plastid, or the chloroplast, that was present in that original eukaryotic cell. There is evidence for this theory because the chloroplasts of brown algae have 4 membranes, which is more than what is observed in red and green algae. The brown algae are true multicellular organisms, and we are able to see how these cells work together in order to support the life of the brown algae. It shows the presence of specialized structures like the holdfast, which anchors the brown algae in place, and other structures like the stipe and blade. Despite showing this type of a complex appearance, brown algae does not have any true tissues. Brown algae can look like plants, but structurally they are different, and hence this is an example of convergent evolution. Oomycetes are another group that are present in the group of Stramenopiles. They are heterotrophs, and some are parasites, while others are saprophytes. Saprophytes are those organisms that feed on decaying matter. Oomycetes are also called as water molds, and they look like fungi, but they are not fungi because their cell composition is different than that of a fungal cell. Oomycetes have historical relevance because they were the causative agent that resulted in the Irish potato famine in the 1840s. In this instant, the Oomycetes were able to infect potatoes and resulted in the failure of the potato crops. This caused many families to migrate away from Ireland, and in fact, nearly 1 million or more of them migrated to the United States of America. Another group that comes under the SAR group is Alveolates. The organisms in this group tend to show the presence of these membrane-enclosed sacs called as alveoli just under their plasma membrane. It's not shown by all organisms, but it was observed in the early organisms that allowed to name this group as Alveolata. It is a diverse group where some tend to possess flagella, like the dinoflagellates, while others tend to possess cilia, like Paramecium. Apicomplexans are a group of organisms that come under the Alveolata group. They are heterotrophic alveolates, and many of them are animal parasites, and hence they have a lot of public health relevance. They're called Apicomplexans because they possess a complex network of organelles at the apex, and this helps the organisms in penetrating into host cells and tissues. A very popular example of an epicomplexan is the Plasmodium species. These are known to cause malaria in many different parts of the world. The Plasmodium species is able to live in two hosts, a mosquito and a human. Let us look at the life cycle of a Plasmodium species. Usually they are present in mosquitoes, and when the mosquito bites a human, the Plasmodium is able to get transmitted into the human body. Now, inside the human, the Plasmodium is able to first go to the liver where it infects the liver cells. It is able to undergo multiple fission in the liver cells, giving rise to many different Plasmodium cells. These are able to enter our blood supply and infect the red blood cells. In some of the red blood cells, they can undergo a special type of cell division that results in the formation of specialized cells called as gametes. Now, these gametes that are present in the blood can then be taken into the body of a mosquito when a mosquito bites a human. Inside the mosquito, these gametes mature and ultimately they fuse to form a zygote. The zygote, which is diploid now and has twice the amount of genetic material, is able to undergo meiosis. Once it undergoes meiosis to form haploid cells, these haploid cells then undergo many rounds of cell division and ultimately are able to get released into the body of the mosquito. The mosquito then is able to transmit these Plasmodium cells back inside a human when it bites the human. Hence, we are able to see that the life cycle of Plasmodium is present in two types of organisms, the human and the mosquito. Rhizaria is another group that comes under the SAR supergroup. Many of the members of the Rhizaria group are amoebas. They produce pseudopodia to move and in order to feed themselves. However, their pseudopodia are very characteristic because they look more like thread-like structures instead of finger or knob-like structures. This is a defining fact of the members of Rhizaria. Archaeplastida is another supergroup of protists that includes red algae, green algae, and land plants. All of them tend to be photosynthetic, however, some of the members are unicellular while others are multicellular. The Archaeplastida members were able to obtain their plastids through the primary endosymbiosis process. We saw some features of brown algae before. Now let us look at green algae. Green algae, which are under the group of Archaeplastida, come in two main flavors, which are the chlorophytes and the charophytes. Some green algae are unicellular, like the Chlamydomonas species, while others are multicellular, but they're multicellular because they're able to form colonies, like volvox. There are others that show true multicellularity, like the ulva species. We also have some charophytes that show true multicellularity as well. Some chlorophytes show a haplodiplontic life cycle. In this scenario, we have a multicellular diploid version of the organism called as a sporophyte, and similarly, we have a multicellular, however, haploid version of the organism, which is called as a gametophyte. This multicellular haploid gametophyte has the ability to form gametes. The gametes are then come together and fuse to form a diploid zygote. This diploid zygote then undergoes many rounds of mitosis to give rise to the multicellular diploid sporophyte. The sporophyte then generates these structures called as sporangia that ultimately give rise to spores, which are haploid. Hence, there is an meiosis event that happens in order to generate the spores. These haploid spores that arose from the diploid multicellular sporophyte then can germinate to give rise to the multicellular haploid gametophyte. And thus the cycle goes on. Between chlorophytes and charophytes, charophytes are more closely related to land plants. As we can observe in the phylogenetic tree, charophytes and land plants share a common ancestor. The charophytes that are currently living today tend to show a haploid life cycle instead of a haplodiplontic life cycle that we see in some chlorophytes. It should be noted, however, that some plants tend to show the haplodiplontic life cycle as well. Amorphia is a supergroup that was created for classification purposes. It was formerly called as Uniconta, but that name is no longer used anymore. It includes different types of organisms like protists, fungi, as well as animals. There are many groups that come under the Amorphia supergroup, but some main groups that we will be looking at is Amoebozoa and Opisthokonta. The protists present in the group of Amoebozoa are amoebas that possess lobe-shaped pseudopodia. Some are free-living, while others have a parasitic life cycle. Some are unicellular, while others are multicellular. Some classical examples of members in the Amoebozoa group are entamoebas, which tend to be unicellular, and slime moles, which can form multicellular structures in addition to living as unicellular organisms. Let us look at some features of one such slime mold called as Dictyostelium discoideum. Dictyostelium discoideum can be present as unicellular, free-living amoebas. However, during starvation conditions, these individual amoebae aggregate together to form a multicellular structure. They're able to form a migrating aggregate that is also called as a slug. This slug can then form a more complex structure which has fruiting bodies. These fruiting bodies have spores inside them, and these spores are then released into the environment. When the conditions are right, these spores can germinate and give rise to amoeba that can live in a unicellular form. And thus we are able to see how Dictyostelium discoideum is able to live in a free-living unicellular form as well as in a multicellular form. Opisthokonta is a group present in the supergroup of Amorphia, which shares an ancestor with the Amoebozoans. It gets its name from two words, opisthos, which means posterior, and kontos, which means flagellum or pole. It got its name because some organisms, or cells present in those organisms, tend to have flagella at their posterior end, and this helps with the movement of the cell. The Opisthokonta can itself be considered as a supergroup because it includes a diverse range of organisms, which includes protists, fungi, as well as animals. It is nested in the group of Oomycetes, which in turn is part of the group of Amorphia. There is evidence that fungi, which are another group of organisms, are closely related to nuclearides, which is an amoeba-like protist. Similarly, animals are closely related to another group of protists called as choanoflagellates. Choanoflagellates are free-living organisms, however, they do have the ability to form colonies. With this, we come to the end of our talk where we learned about protists and why the kingdom of Protista was abandoned. We learned about the classification of protists and the different supergroups that have been formed. We also looked at some of the features and examples of organisms that belong to some supergroups.